mother. Sweet mother, I no go forget you for the suffer way you suffer for me. Sweet mother, I no go forget you for the suffer way you suffer for me. When I dey cry, my mother go carry me. She go say, my pikin, wetin you dey cry, yo yo? Stop, 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 stop. Make you no cry again, oh. When I want sleep, my mother go bed me. She go lie me well for bed, oh. She cover me cloth, say make you sleep, 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 my pikin, oh. When I dey hungry, my mother go run up and down. She dey find me something when I go chop, oh. Sweet mother, sweet mother, oh, eh, oh. So mama, sweet mother. When I dey sick, my mother go cry, cry, cry. She go say instead when I go die, make she die, oh. She go beg God, God help me, my pikin, oh. Oh, my mother. If I no sleep, my mother no go sleep. If I no chop, my mother no go chop. She no dey tire, sweet mother. I no go forget the suffer way you suffer for me, yeah, yeah. Sweet mother, yeah, sweet mother, oh, yeah. Oh, sweet mother, I will never forget you for the suffer you suffer for me. And if I should forget you, therefore I forget my life. The air I breathe in. Yeah, so. And there are you men on earth, dare you not forget your mother. For if you forget your mother,
Thank you. That was nice.
Good evening and welcome to an event commemorating Black History Month. The event from Rosa Parks, Black Sisters Rising, they have their say. This is a virtual discussion on the role of Black women in the 2020 presidential elections. How far have we come since Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat? I am tired of being tired. What has been the role of Black women in the 2020 United States presidential election in securing a Biden-Harris presidency? The 2020 United States presidential election was swayed by votes of Black women in Georgia, putting a Biden-Harris team in the White House. We have a Black sister in the White House. Black sisters are rising. The leading questions will be, how can we dismantle the myriad policies which exist? What are the critical issues facing Black Americans? What is the role of the Black media? In building back better, which is a terminology that's been used globally, how can we build back better the Black community in the United States, or more particularly, how can we build forward better? How was it possible to rally historically underrepresented and socially responsible voters in Georgia? How did a deep South state like Georgia finally go blue? What are the policies that exist in the United States that harms Black and Brown voters? If I may quote from Stacey Abrams speaking recently when she says, "My responsibility was instead to focus on the right to vote and not on my right to be governor. I had no right to be governor, but I had an obligation to do the work that I said I would do if I were governor. We knocked on doors in pockets of communities that had never been touched, and we kept coming back. Is there anyone else in your family who needs to register? What about the voters?" End of quote. We won the seats, but the work to dismantle the myriad policies that harm Black and Brown communities still exists. End of quote from the National Coalition on Black Participation. At this juncture, I'd like to give a huge thank you to the Black sisters who made it possible to change Georgia blue. From Natasha Brown, Stacey Abrahams, Inse Ofuk, Melanie L. Campbell, Tamika Aikens, Helen Butler, and Deborah Scott, I say a huge thank you to my sisters, Black sisters. You are indeed rising. It now gives me great pleasure to hand across to my sister from South Africa, Palisa Morundu. My sister, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Ugoji, again, for highlighting Black History Month. The series you've had over the month has been very, very timely and inspirational for me, and I'm glad that you are ending the Black History Month on a high note. And I want to just say that given the expertise on this panel, I thought maybe to take a bit of a step back and talk a little bit about the arc of history of Black women. And indeed, as you're saying, that we are celebrating the rise of a Black sister. There is a lot to celebrate. We should celebrate because we are making progress. We should celebrate because also ours has been a long journey. We should also celebrate because our voice is loud and is being heard. But we should also celebrate because we know where we come from. So if you look at the social pyramid, we know very well that as Black women, we occupy the bottom of that social structure. In South Africa, as you know, where I come from, we understood this position quite clearly in the beginning of the 20th century. First, Black women's land, as all Black people's land in South Africa, was taken away from them. Their men were forced off the land to go work in the mines. Left with no land, women could not grow food and feed their families. So they also left the rural areas and go into the urban areas. So it is no coincidence that the very first demonstration in South Africa in 1913 was led by Black women to protest against the past laws. And as you know, the past laws were really meant to control the movement of Black people in South Africa, and the women were the first people to say, no, it will not happen. And that protest that happened in 1913 culminated in 1955, where women of all races marched to the seat of power of the apartheid state at that time to say that Black women would not carry the hated passes. But also women developed a much deeper understanding of their own oppression, and it helps to clarify quite sharply, and you see what's happening here in the United States as well. Clarify quite clearly what the demands are. It was understood at that time that women, we suffered, as Black women, we suffered triple oppression. We're oppressed as Black people, we were oppressed as women, and we were oppressed at the workplace. And this understanding of the fundamentals of our oppression helps to clarify a whole lot of things. You will recall that the ANC led the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, and it was formed in 1912. But it was only allowed, women were not allowed to be part of that struggle against apartheid or to join the ANC. They were only allowed to join the ANC in 1943. So the question was, how is it possible that the very party that is formed to lead the struggle against apartheid denied half of the population the right to be part of that organization? So it was no coincidence that after they had joined in 1943, women were the first ones. The first major demonstration against the apartheid government was led by women in 1955 when they marched to the seat of power. We also know the bravery and iconic role that someone like Winnie Mandela played in the struggle against apartheid. Despite being married to the most famous prisoner in the world, Winnie made sure that her role in the struggle would not be defined by the association with her husband, that she would emerge as a leader in her own right. And similarly, there were other women who led from the front, like Albertina Sisulu, who was the president of the United Democratic Front at that time, when the clashes with the apartheid state was at their most intense. And as South Africa emerged from apartheid into a non-racial, non-sexist democracy, women continued to advocate for themselves. The right to control their own bodies was one of the first legislations that passed in 1996 as the country transitioned from apartheid to independence. We do have right now what we call the Commission on Gender Equality, whose task is to promote gender equality and advise and make recommendations to Parliament on any laws that will affect gender equality and status of women. On August 8, I'm sure you all know, in South Africa is a national holiday to celebrate women. It is on this day that in 1955 that thousands of women marched on the seat of power, as I said. But on this day, every day we take stock on the role women played in the fight for the right to vote, fight against the hated past laws, fighting for the right to control our own bodies, fighting for equal work, for equal pay, fighting for representation in Parliament, in the boardrooms, in the newsrooms. So we celebrate that on August 8 every year. And for me, living in the United States right now, and I'm able to draw the parallels between what Black women have done in the fight for freedom in the United States and what women in South Africa and on the continent have done. Countless Black women that we don't hear about or even celebrate enough started this journey way back in the United States during the suffrage movement here. Women like Sojourner Truth, Charlotte Fortin and her daughters, Harriet and Margaretta, and many others who actively campaigned to end slavery and for the right to vote. So today, when we see that 3 Black women started probably one of the biggest movements of our time, the Black Lives Matter movement, we realize that it is a continuation of a movement that Black women started and led way back during the times of slavery, or way back during the times of apartheid or the times of colonialism on the continent. It is the Black women who brought to the attention of the world that Black men face police brutality in the United States. It is Black women who brought to the attention of the world that Black women too get killed by cops in America with the hashtag Say Her Name. It is Black women, as you said, that mobilized to get out the vote so that Black people came out in their numbers to vote in the last elections last year. So today we celebrate the fact that the second most powerful person in the world is a Black woman, and that's Vice President Kamala Harris. We celebrate the fact that the head of the World Trade Organization is a Black woman, that is Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. So 2021, I want to say, has been a good year for us. But even as we celebrate, we need to remember that our struggle is a long one. It remains a long one because everywhere you go on the continent, in the United States, everywhere you go around the world, the face of poverty remains that of a Black or brown woman. So we rise, as we rise, we need to remember that no society will fully enjoy freedom until all women are free. And as Maya Angelou wrote before, that history, despite its wrenching pain cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. So I celebrate the progress that we made. And I think we need to take stock of history and know where we come from and that we are on the march to progress. Thanks.
Thank you so much, my sister Palesa. Really thank you. And I really appreciate your perspectives from South Africa. Because although we may come from different parts of the continent of Africa, we are indeed united. We face the same challenges, the same problems. If I may quote from Inse Ufo of the New Georgia Project, she said before the elections, we're so excited to have conversations with Georgians about how they leverage this power that they have in this moment. I think that never before have Georgians mattered more to, our democracy. Elections are compression points for us. They're opportunities for us to test the power that we're building and an opportunity to bring about the change that we seek, to elect champions or people who will co-govern with communities to bring about the change that we seek. End of quote. It now gives me great pleasure to hand across to my sister Angel. I really appreciate your presence, Angel, because I'm aware that it's past midnight where you are. But as we say, Black sisters rising, and we need to stick together. Thank you so much, my sister.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eze, for this invitation. And good afternoon, all of you. And it's a great pleasure for me to participate to this important discussion alongside with very accomplished ladies and gentlemen right here on the platform. It's as the previous speaker just said, it's a very good way to close the month of February, celebrating Black history and transitioning into celebrating Black women as well. That create a combination of Blackness and also show the importance of what we are playing at Black women and at in today's global scheme. So we were supposed to talk about the elections, and my perspective is a little bit broader than election, and it goes beyond the U.S. Obviously, all of us, and I'm sure Madam President, she had to hear that, but Dominda White will probably explain more to you about, talk to you more about the role of Black women and Black Democrats in the election, how they deliver the vote to elect President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, and also to turn Georgia blue. I will come up with maybe more, take the diaspora perspective and maybe the international perspective. Obviously, we all know how important our roles are when it comes to building the society since the convention, the Tokyo Convention. Right now, thank God, the environment is more conducive for women to rise, because what our forefather or foremothers did with Rosa Parks, but also what the youngsters are doing, what they did last year, the Black Lives Matter, Black Magic Girls, all those big, powerful, strategic Black women who crafted American politics on the scene or behind the scene. They make that environment conducive for us to rise. But internationally, if you think about the continents, we also have the same challenge. There's a bridge between history in South Africa and American history, but it's also we have the same struggle in the continent with Black women in Africa, in the US in general. But no, history shows us no sometimes where you think that surprise the rise is not coming is the continent who produced the first African Black leader, African American or African leader with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and after that we have many vice president, many prime minister, other president like the Mauritius, and then lately the president of Ethiopia, who saw also a very accomplished women. And now we have the person in charge of the global economy is now the accomplished Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala from Nigeria and America. So, but in the U.S., no, the struggle is it was a little bit different. especially after the Clinton election. We were all involved in Clinton's election, hoping that she would be the first woman to be elected. But I think that's where the mobilization started. I was part of the executive women for Hillary back then. And then now it became a little bit, we have a little bit foundation combined with what African American did, because at the end of the day, they delivered the vote. Did the past 2 years, we were able to mobilize effectively in this election. So, but we need to take into consideration when we talk about the minority in general or the black general, we need to remember there's 23 million immigrant voters there in the US, out of which you have maybe 1.2 African immigrant or African diaspora eligible to vote, and probably 75% of them were women. And we deliver almost 80% of our votes. But surprisingly, a lot of African in America were supporting Trump. But the majority of women, the African diaspora or African in America, women were pro Biden and pro Kamala Harris. I don't remember the number, but it's close to 70% of the black immigrant vote voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. The lesson to learn from that experience is that no, the biggest, the most dangerous moment is after the victory. We delivered the vote. We elected our first black vice president. Now we need to stay on course, continue to mobilize, give her the resources that we need to be effective leader, so that in coming 4 years, in 8 years, she'll be well positioned to run again or to win again. And we also need to organize and support her, not just for her to continue to win, but also to make us proud and be one of the biggest and most effective leader America had. Obama's records are clear. His name, he didn't have any issue compared to the other previous presidents. So we can say he was one of the most effective presidents in American history. So we need to make sure that our sisters in charge now stay on that record and keep the standard very low. In doing that, open the doors to many others to come. Number one. Number two, policy wise. So in policy, we need to have the three P's together: the policy, the public opinion, and the procedure. Right now, we control the House, the House of Representatives, and we control the Senate. So the procedure is effective. The public opinion is right because everybody understands the value of African of women leadership. There was even this think tank, I think the Women in Law report, that clearly show evidence that women in parliament are more effective than men in parliament. So it's clear that the world knows that women leaders are more effective than men with type of leadership. So the environment is conducive, the procedure is there, and the policy is also there. Now we need to make sure we define that policy and we continue to support our leadership, continue to elect women in position of power, not just at the ministerial level, but you also think about the state level, the county, the community, because all politics is local. So we need to continue to mobilize and get our women elected locally, on the state, in the county, on all those various boards, and at the further level. Same thing in Africa. Being in power is not just being a minister or being an MP. The country, like South Africa, for example, is one of the countries that they were able to have the highest level of parity. The highest one is Rwanda. I think South Africa, Mauritius, and Ethiopia, when it comes to member of parliament and ministerial position, are very well positioned compared to other countries in the world, which is good. But all politics is local. We need to equip our women, train them, give them the confidence that they need, mentor them, build a sisterhood, and make sure they occupied all the position, even at the lowest level. I'm in Cameroon right now, and then when I go to the village, I'm in my village in Bana, in the west part of Cameroon, in the mountain. When you have this gathering, traditional meetings, you see men everywhere. You don't see women. Even when they have role in the kingdom, it's all sometimes relegated to uh, soft issues. We need to change that paradigm by educating our women about the role they can play in the community, and make sure that they understand that going with demanding to be at the table does not mean that they are challenging the men or they're castrating the men. It's just making sure that the voices are heard where it's supposed to be. You also always need to have somebody representing us in those boardrooms or in the place when decisions are made. So we also need to help them understand that our African culture, we have this misperception that in African culture, women are submissive, our culture, we are second class. In reality, our tradition prepared our women to be strong. That's why they were able to do what they were able to do and survive despite the fact that the entire system against them. But now it's just a question of exercising those skills and breaking down the barrier, the traditional barrier, the stigma, the misconception, and make sure that they are free to deploy their wings and help bring our community better and build back our community better and build our communities. Because at the end of the day, not using our women is almost like deciding to operate with only one hand. We represent 60% of our population. We can't operate with only one hand. We need both hands to build our countries, our various countries. It could be the US, or it could be South Africa or African countries. We really need to put all our hands on deck to make sure we survive, especially in this post-COVID-19 era where nobody is saying that openly, but when you look at how people are living now in this environment, especially in developing countries, women are at the forefront of this pandemic. Because even if the restaurant is not opening, if the business doesn't run, everybody have to eat. And they're feeding the family, they're educating the children, and they're treating the sick people. So almost 90% of people at the forefront of this pandemic are women. So it's really, really important for us to continue to build a sisterhood. And for that, I really commend you, Dr. Eze, for continuing to engage with us and continue to create an environment where we can exchange values and ideas and make sure we stay connected and we are committed to put our efforts toward the right direction. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, my sister. And I'd like to also further make a comment on the point you made about women still being at the forefront despite this ongoing global pandemic. We need to remember women healthcare workers. They're putting their life, at the forefront of this. Women still being mothers at home despite the ongoing pandemic. They're homeschooling their children. So we really need to sort of celebrate women, and tomorrow we're into Women's Month, isn't it? Yeah. We'll have the virtual commission on the status of women. The first time we're going to have it virtually at the UN. So, we really must sort of raise up our hands and clap for our sisters who are the forefront at this very trying time. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Dorinda White, President of DC Federation of Democratic Women, DC Democratic Party Committee Women, and member of Black Women for Biden. Dorinda, I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. And the first question I'd like to ask is, how did you do it? How were you able to secure a Democratic victory this time? And more importantly, how are you able to put our Black sister, our sister, in the White House? Huge congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I can say, first of all, it was a labor of love for democracy and love for putting forth a woman as a candidate as the Vice President of the United States. Thank you, Dr. Eze, for having me here, and Angel for suggesting that I be a part of this conversation. As you mentioned, thank you. As you mentioned, I am the president of the DC Federation of Democratic Women. We are about 200 women here in the District of Columbia that does not have representation in the US House of Representatives. We have no vote on the House floor, but we do have a congresswoman who represents us. So we kind of did a heavy lift, but I want to go back one moment to the actual flyer that you've been sending out that has featured Rosa Parks as part of the focus on Black Sisters Rising. I had the pleasure of meeting Rosa Parks, along with Coretta Scott King, along with Betty Shabazz, and many, many, many women leaders when I worked back, when I first came back to the country. I was out of the country for about 10 years in Europe. And when I came back, I was very fortunate to get an opportunity to work with Dr. C. Dolores Tucker, who was the first African-American Secretary of State in the United States. And she hailed originally her family from the Bahamas. So she was of Caribbean origin. However, she became a very strong political power broker here in Washington, D.C. And I worked with her as her right-hand person to develop her chapters and membership around the country, but she would always bring in these powerful Black women. So I met and took a picture with Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, Myrlie Evers Williams, Carol Moseley Braun. The list is endless. So I was exposed I was very young. I was exposed at a younger age to a lot of powerful Black women who were making a difference before I even knew that they were going to be so impactful, and they were there. I say that all to say that even C. Dolores Tucker back then, this was in the 90s, formed a commission on presidential appointments to put forth Black women as political appointees when Clinton came in both of his administrations. So she was very forward thinking in moving forward women to create the shoulders upon which Kamala Harris stands today. Now, what did we do here? It was, I can tell you, it was very unusual because the pandemic hit in March. It really hit us hard. And we had to pivot to not only go online with everything with Zoom and using technology that many of us hadn't used only in our jobs, but we also had to deal with the repercussions of Black Lives Matter. And I live right here near the Capitol. Angel knows I live not far from the Capitol. I live not far from the White House. I could hear all the noises from the protests, the flash bombs, the marches. They marched right in here. The Black Lives Matter group marched right here below my window. And I have to say, it was a collective chain of events that led us to really spur us on to make a difference. I can tell you 4 years ago when we were campaigning to make certain that the orange head guy was not going to be our president, many, many young people that I approached said, oh, we're not going to vote. We're not voting. We have no interest. It doesn't impact us. And then they found out the hard way that everything that administration did directly either impacted them or their families or their communities. And ultimately, when we came to 2020, they realized, oh my gosh, it's going to affect my health too, because our president at that time was waylaying the concept of COVID-19 and did not make it a priority for us to really focus on. So I have to say, from the DC Federation of Democratic Women, we're about 200 women. We're part of 34 federations around the country. What we did, since we didn't really have to push to get our Congresswoman reelected, she gets reelected every 2 years without fail. And so what we did is we decided to focus on the battleground states, predominantly Georgia. We worked in Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, Pennsylvania, Florida, and we also did Virginia. We basically decided that we were going to muster our forces, and by hook or crook, we were going to use texting. We used a lot of Zoom to actually hold meetings that we had up to 400 participants from around the country, focused on voter suppression. We highlighted voter suppression because the current postmaster had assiduously gone out to make certain that he was going to stop any use of the postal services for us to do the mail-in ballots. Now, many of you know from around the world, you heard that normally most Americans, we go to the polls. It's like souls to the polls. We go to the polls in great numbers when it comes down to voting, because we want the visual, and we also want to know that our vote counts. So we want to see it as it's being done. This year, when Congress allowed us to do the mail-in ballots, well, actually the states decided to do the mail-in ballots. It became another mountain to climb, so to speak. because we had to go through the process of educating people around the country of the importance of getting that envelope. And we also taught them how to divert their energies. And if they couldn't make it to a mailbox, where they had to go to make certain that their envelope was received and recorded, and to follow up to make certain that their vote had been counted and received. So as we educated ourselves on the importance of mail-in voting and how to do it and how it was going to be effective, we learned along the way that many, many people, especially our elderly African-American women, and those who were of our immigrant community who were able to vote in the election, many of them were disconnected because of the great digital divide. They were not online. They were not on Twitter. They were not on Facebook. So they were not informed of the nuances of the ways that they could get their votes out and done and completed. So we basically went back and did the old-fashioned way. We started telephone trees. We had one person call 20 or 30 people. We knew that everybody, mostly everybody, even around the world, has a cell phone, a smartphone. So we engaged massive text campaigns. One day myself, I think I sent out texts through Hustle for about 7,300 people in one day. And many of them tried to respond back. And I said, just make certain you vote. So, but with the efforts that we use to make certain, especially that Black women were informed and involved in the process, was we made them, we shared with them the importance not only of this election, but also the importance of how the way this election would turn out, it would impact their families. As they had seen during the COVID crisis, and we can say this for Washington, D.C., the vast majority of our 1,000 deaths, we just met the 1,000 death number 2 days ago, were Black women, mothers, grandmothers, aunts, cousins, sisters. And it hit mostly amongst Black women because many of them were healthcare workers, and they worked in the bowels of the hospitals, taking care of other people to make certain that they didn't die. And oftentimes they caught COVID and they took it home. So that was also another barrier for us to overcome, because we had to not only reach these women who had families and who were out there struggling to make a living, but many of them were dying. And many of them, many of the voting groups around the country in the different states were already focusing on, is that a dead voter? Is that that person who's voting? Are they alive? Are they dead? Basically trying to remove them from the voting rolls. Here in Washington, D.C., we didn't really have that issue. But what we found is we started engaging many, many young people. The ones who said 4 years ago, oh, it doesn't matter to me, I'm not voting. We started engaging them. A lot of young women who were on college campuses, and of course, the Divine Nine, the sorority. I'm an AKA, similar to Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, similar to our vice president. And we engaged our sorority sisters from around the world. We have 300,000 here in the United States, but we have them spread all over the world. We engaged the Alpha Kappa Alpha plus the other 8 organizations, which consists of both men and women. They went out and pounded the pavement. They called, they emailed, they texted, and many of them went to Georgia and knocked on doors. Now, Georgia was a very unique case. Georgia had been in the makings for quite some time. Many of you don't know that there are many, many, many African-American state senators in the state of Georgia. No one talks about them, but they're there and they make a difference. Although Georgia had been red all these years, the women coalesced in Georgia under the leadership of Stacey Abrams, and they focused on making certain that these younger people from Morehouse, from Clark Atlanta, from all the Black universities, the HBCUs, got out and they spread across the state to make certain that people got out to vote. So I don't want to go on. I don't know if I've gone on too long, but our main objective was to use whatever means necessarily, similar to what they did during the Civil Rights Movement. Although it was silent, but they did things in a silent way, in a peaceful way that got things done, working in the background. We did the same thing too, because we knew that there were the powers that be that were on the sideline saying, oh, they're not going to do anything. they're not going to make a difference. They're not going to get out there and vote. But we knew that that is what was going to happen.
Well, thank you very much. You mentioned, could I just ask you a question briefly? Yes. You mentioned some states you were very active in the South.
Yes.
Why didn't you go to Mississippi?
Because they had already been, those states, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana.
Oh, Tennessee, yeah.
They're very, very closed off. Even Georgia. When people come from the outside in, they tend to ostracize them, and not because we're not of that culture. They have their totally different culture down there, and they have their own apparatus in place internally in their state. Even when dealing with Georgia, and we had offered here from the Democratic State Party in DC, we offered to go down there physically. They said, no, we want Georgians to work our polls and work with the Georgian voters, because Georgians know Georgians. And so we didn't touch those states, not because they weren't viable states to touch, but because we knew the battleground ones that we had to really turn blue to make a difference. And we knew that Georgia, as opposed to Louisiana has had its apparatus in place for eons, similar to Georgia. But Georgia was quite particular because we were also dealing with 2 Senate races. So we focused on North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Florida, Georgia, and what other place did we, Texas.
Yeah, because in Georgia, you did mention you had the Senate races.
Yes.
We had the Ossoff and the Warnock victory.
Yes.
Which in itself showed the Black-Jewish alliance was very much alive.
That is true.
And it was unique. This victory was particularly unique. You know, when you think about the struggles in the Black community and the Jewish community, it was indeed a unique and historical moment. I'd like to thank you for the tremendous work you've done to mobilizing the Black voters. And I hope, my only wish will be, I hope in future you will do some work in Mississippi, you know, to mobilize the women. Now, the reason why I'm particular about Mississippi is I have a home in Mississippi, and I do know the challenges you're talking about, because when I first turned up there and was trying to sort of engage the women in discussions that we're having now, I met a tremendous barrier. You know, there's some communities, some areas that when they see change, they're very suspicious of change. So you can imagine when they see somebody like me, who's first and foremost, you know, I'm not an African American, I'm of Caribbean, Nigerian descent. Most people who got tremendously, you know, they get suspicious. You know, why are you doing this? You know, when you try to engage in a dialogue, and in the small town in Mississippi, I did manage to succeed about 2 years ago in having the Black and the white community actually sit down for a discussion and having a workshop and inviting the African American community and the white community in Mississippi. Obviously, the relations historically has been very strained, and to actually achieve that was something for the small town. You know, so obviously dialogue is very important because it breaks down this racial barrier, and it's very important to have women to engage in this dialogue, because I found that eventually the African American women in Mississippi were actually inviting me to speak at their church. I spoke at a Baptist church. I did speak at a church owned by a pastor, my neighbor, and after I spoke, he never invited me back again, and he never spoke to me again. So you can tell the difference, you know, whether they invite you back again. But the Methodist church and the women in Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee, it took them a while to warm to me, you know. And I say, you just keep on knocking on that door. You keep on knocking on that door, and eventually they'll say, okay, we're tired of this woman. let us invite her to speak. As I said, I spoke in front of some male pastors. They never invited me back. Up to today, they don't even talk to me. As I say, we don't want your ideas here, Ms. Gigi. Okay, so that's space clear. It gives me great pleasure to turn across to my dear sister from Nigeria, Attorney Albert Benson. The floor is yours, and if you can tell us what Nigerian women are doing.
Hi, everyone. I'm very honored and excited to be part of this discussion. Like my sister said, my name is Norma Albert Benson. I am a Nigerian by origin and American by faith. So in 2009, I founded a nonprofit in Nigeria, BIFA Women and Childcare Foundation. And basically what the nonprofit was founded on, our vision was to provide legal aid for women and children, provide access to the courts, and basically to provide an injured woman with the wherewithal to seek redress, and which was something that it was a vacuum in Nigeria. And I believe, as we all know, patriarchy is something that has been existent for millennia in Africa in general. So, and Nigeria being a patriarchal society has always had that issue with suppressing women, despite the fact that we do have very strong women who come from Nigeria, but there's always that issue about women being second place. And this affected every area of this segregation and inequality affected every area of having women succeed. So despite the fact that women in most families in Africa, women seem to be the breadwinners presently, and women are more efficient and effective, they still have their voices silenced in so many areas. And it has been an issue. But as in recent times, women have started to rise up to the occasion. Most of our NGOs and strategic groups and most of the organizations that we have formed for the past decade have been able to work to bring women to the forefront and challenge the stereotypes that have segregated women and put women behind. And when I started to work on legal aid, I was just doing it as a young lawyer, trying to make sure women get a voice in courts and trying to make sure that women are not oppressed, especially because in the eastern part of Nigeria where I come from, women go through a lot of torture and dehumanization when they lose their husbands. And a lot of women, there's so many terrible practices that go on. You have women who are forced to drink the water that they used to bathe the dead body of their husbands just to make them swear that they didn't kill him. So there were so many practices that we just needed to put behind us, which was what spurred me to start my organization in the first place. But then when I started, I started to see so many things. So many things were exposed to the limelight that I didn't even know about, that a lot of people didn't even know about. And that kind of spurred me into starting many more initiatives. And I started to work with prison women. I found out that there were women who were in prison unjustly. And I started to work with prison women. I started a legal aid unit in the Nigerian prisons. And in 2016, I got nominated by the US Department of State by President Obama's initiative for young African leaders, Mandela Washington Fellowship. And that was actually what spurred me and kind of brought me out more and exposed me more to both so many things that were injustices that were going on. And that kind of made me like a kind of a threat to people who perpetrated these injustices. And at that point, after I came to the US and received the award from President Obama and went back to Nigeria, I started to face a lot of challenges. I started to get threats from everywhere, from the government, from people who felt, oh, you're trying to expose what we're doing. You're trying to, tell the world that we're doing this and that. You're painting us in a bad light. And, and that led to a lot of things. I got abducted, I got tortured, and finally I came into the US as a refugee, and that was how I came here. So by the time I came to the US, I was done. I just, with all of the trauma that I had been through, I decided I was done with anything social justice. And it took me a while. It took a lot of therapy. It took a lot of healing. And I'm grateful. I thank God for my sister Ugoji and so many other sisters who rallied around me, especially the contacts that I had made in the US and who rallied around me and were able to help me. And then I was able to come out of that, and I decided that this is what I want to keep doing. And starting to look back at Nigeria, I started to I started to do better because I was working from a distance. I didn't have people coming to break into my office like they did in Nigeria so many times. They broke into my office, they threatened, they hurt people, they took people into custody illegally. And I was able to do so many things from here. And Nigerian women have always tried to be in the forefront of providing that justice. And when I came here and I met with that community of Nigerian women who were here, I was also able to start to build that relationship and start to talk about how we can help African women. And the government at the time was also a government, especially with what was going on with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that was going on. It was something that spoiled a lot of us, that made us to know that we needed to get involved. We needed to be able to deflate most of the conspiracy theories they had against Biden at the time. And they used a lot of Africans to spread the conspiracy theories that they had. And we knew that we had a job, we had a duty to deflate most of those things and get people to go out and vote. Because the challenge that we saw in the African community was that most people don't even vote, because people are giving that impression that, oh, your vote doesn't count, oh, it doesn't matter, oh, even if you don't vote, it doesn't matter. And that was the impression that we had. So the African sisters, the Nigerian sisters that we had here in the US, we knew that we had that duty to rally around our own. We're quite a number. And if we could get ourselves to go out and vote in our different states, and we got to the point where we started to even offer rides. We called people, we were on social media trying to tell people, oh, you need a ride to the polls, I can help safely get you to the polls. And we started to offer rides. We started to offer free Uber rides and personal rides. People volunteered to offer their cards. And these were things that we did last year because we knew we were done. We knew that as immigrants in the US, if the government continued, then I wouldn't even know if it was going to be worse than what we suffered in Nigeria, because we didn't know what the next 4 years of that administration was going to look like, because it kept sinking deep and deep and deep. And we knew that there had to be a stop to it. So I'm very excited and seeing people who were able to also come out and rise up to it, because women actually do make impact. Like I know that I was able to talk to a lot of my family members who were not going to vote. And they were like, oh, they saw reasons. And seeing how passionate women can be, and seeing how passionate women can take courses to any length, not giving up and standing strong to it, that is actually what has helped us. And like we're saying, this is not the time to relent, because we still have subsequent elections coming up. We still have Congress coming up in 2 years. We still have subsequent elections coming up, and we don't have to relent, because if we continue, people are afraid. People are afraid of Africans. People are afraid of Black women, because they know that we have a force and that we're very passionate. So they are trying everything they can to suppress. They are trying everything, but I'm very glad because of the environment we're in, the United States is quite different from Africa. If I was doing what I was doing, but by now in Africa, I would have disappeared. Somebody would have adopted you and you're gone. But here we have the voice, and that voice is something that we should not take for granted at any point. I try to talk about it anywhere, especially on social media and anywhere I have the presence and anywhere I have an audience. I'm telling people about the importance of voting and how much that one vote counts. And we don't have to stop. We have to also continue to support the government. We have to deflate the conspiracy theories wherever we hear it or whenever we hear it. Because the world is not getting bad because of what bad people are doing, but because of the silence of good people. So we have to keep talking about it, and we have to keep working towards achieving much more. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we lost our.
I think Angel might have fallen off too.
Yeah, and I also think that Dr. Chair has also fallen off.
I see also. Neoma, am I saying your name right?
Yes.
Neoma, I want to ask you a question since we have a void here for a moment. I had been informed, I'm very involved in the African community here in Washington, D.C. And through some of my friends who are members of churches that are Ghanaian, Nigerian, and others, I found out through the grapevine, many of them would send me what were being sent around to many of the parishioners in the churches here to pray fervently, and to fast for President Trump. Now, this was going on back in Nigeria and in Ghana. And here, they were spearheading it. They were spearheading here from here. And I felt at a loss in terms of how I knew I could not intercede. Being a Black American, I said, okay, I better not try to get into waters that I can muddy up and they'll come and say, who are you? But there was a very concerted effort, and I'm certain you're aware of it, where many of the relatives back at home were supporting the Trump. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, most definitely I will, because this forms the basis of the conspiracy theories that I was talking about. Because there were so many conspiracy theories going on about President Biden being a Satanist, and Trump being the savior and coming in and being persecuted. And, you know, this was so strong because if you're not close to the Biden administration, if you're not close to, like, I was very close to the Obama administration from the relationship that I had, you will it's so believable. The theories that they were passing around was so believable. They had issues, and you know, Nigeria is a very kind of religious country, and they buy these conspiracy theories as long as there is God mentioned in it. So it was so believable because they said, oh, Biden and President Obama was supporting LGBTQ, and this is something that is Satanist, and this is what Nigerians believe, and this is what they sold. And so they believe that God has sent Trump to rescue America and to rescue the world.
The White House. He spoke.
And because Trump is trying to rescue the world, he's being persecuted the way Jesus was persecuted, and people are spreading false information against him. And there were even pastors, there were people, religious leaders who were propagating these theories in their churches.
Right.
And Nigerians are the kind of people who take everything from their religious leaders hook, line, and sinker. So when they come out in the open to, I don't know what the incentive is. That is what I still don't know. But I keep asking, and you know, we were able to start to work to deflate these theories, because I was able to tell people from a very personal perspective. I was like, I've received a nomination and award from this man, President Obama, and I've come to meet him. And I know very well, and I can tell you that there is nothing Satanist about him, and there's nothing occultic about him like they try to make people believe. Right. And we started to work to deflate these theories, and we tried to do it. We did it in some churches, but we still have some churches who just didn't want to give us a listening ear. So what we tried to do was we started to have one-on-one conversations with people. We started to show people what achievements Obama had done, because the Biden administration was seen to them as an Obama third term. So we tried to show them what Obama had done in his time, what Trump has done in just 4 years. I mean, the Trump that they were trying to support was the same person who called their country a shithole, who banned them from immigrating to America, who did so. So it's so hard to believe where their incentive is coming from.
Right.
But they just saw him as a messiah and one who was coming to abolish so many things that were evil. So that was what happened. So it was all conspiracy theories.
Okay. But because it left me, I was a few times when I interacted with some of the my sorority sister is married, and my line sister is married to Archbishop Duncan Williams in Ghana. And I would sometimes go online and listen to the church services just to get an idea of what was going on. And I said, wait a second, they're fasting and praying that Trump is reelected? And the way that he spoke about and he stopped immigration, families have been broke, whole 9 yards. And I was caught off guard. I never quite understood, but now that you've said it from the standpoint of conspiracy theories, it makes perfect sense, because he did, before he came in, he did go to the evangelicals and he asked for religious cover, and they gave it to him. But when he started doing what he was doing, the evangelical leaders were like, uh-oh, I can't go and backtrack and say he's not the chosen one or the one that we have anointed. So they couldn't go, they would lose face. So I was perplexed, because we have a large African community here, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. They were conspiracy theorists. Okay, got it. Thank you. Dr. Eze.
Sorry about that. I had problems with the internet.
It's okay.
What's happened to Angel? Angel has gone to sleep.
No, she might have had problems too with the internet.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Professor Asher, would you like to make some comments?
Don't egg me on. Yes. Listening to Dorita, she's really has stolen my heart, because this is exactly, as a professor for undergraduates in political science, this is the kind of involvement I wish them to be engaged in, to vote. In fact, I never miss an election, even as low as a school board election. A few comments, and this is an indication. Back in 1974, I was the first Greek American Jewish immigrant Holocaust survivor to be the Republican and Liberal Party candidate for assembly in New York State.
Wow.
So I truly believe, by the way, that's the kind, I'm still a Republican, because I came to this country in 1956, not that Eisenhower had anything to do with it, but through my study, we believe in the Big Ten theory that whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you must invite others to come in order to win. So in 1964, in those days, you had to be 21 to vote. So I just turned 21, and I proceeded to cross the aisle and vote for LBJ. I never left it. I am proud to say I did not vote for Reagan. I did not vote for Bush. And I cried before Oprah Winfrey and Jesse Jackson cried when I saw Obama, A, win the nomination, and B, win the election. I live in a Jewish area that is very right-wing, very wealthy, 10 minutes away from Kennedy Airport. but very right-wing religiously and politically. I had the only Obama-Biden sign in 08 and 12. Every day I would wake up to look out and see whether the sign was still there. Then I would examine the windows to see if any of them were cracked. It was part of the maturity of my neighbors that they said, after all, he's a professor, what do you expect? Another comment. You mentioned, I love Eleanor Norton Holmes. Before she became a congresswoman, she was mine. She was our human rights commissioner in New York City a long, long time, and a councilwoman before that. So I adore that woman. I am, by the way, I attended Howard University for a year in the law school. So I have familiarity with the 68 uprising, sittings, etc. And I was involved with the civil rights movement in my own. As you were speaking, I kept saying parochialism. You mentioned about the parochialism of Georgia. You don't have to go very far. We celebrate Kamala Harris and Barack Obama. Scratch it a little bit, and you see that they are of immigrant stock. Duh. So I am suggesting something very, very controversial, perhaps, but a reality. There is a chasm between Black Americans and immigrant immigrant Blacks who become American. And this is something, there is a tension. I know that and I'm not surprised that there is some segment of the Black community would be for Trump, about the expression, because they think of him the way some segment of the Jewish population that endorse him. The majority is over 70% traditionally do not vote liberal and progressive. So, but there is a consistent segment that is very right wing. They think of him as a kind of model. Never mind that if you scratch his business acumen, it is less than zero. But don't waste time with mentioning facts. Fact oriented is not there. They're deferential. I witness this deferential to status and education, etc. It reminds me of a time that I'm from Greece, and I married a girl from there. So my ketubah, the wedding contract, had to say, and you, Asher, promise to bring our daughter back frequently to examine how well you treat her. So I go there. So summers, and I would go to the. You are delightful. I would go to the beach, and and I would speak to my wife bilingually, even throw in some Hebrew, and this. And one woman comes to me and says, "Professor, it is such an honor to be swimming with you." I said, "What? What? The water is there for everybody." No, but somehow, and that goes again for immigrants from Africa in terms of there is homophobia. I witnessed. There is patriarchy. There is a difference about being born a male. Never mind that in America, the tragedy of Black American families is that they are broken, that so many of them wind up, so many males wind up behind bars, not the bar down the street, but, the
prison.
corrugated bars. And there are no male models, for the children. And they keep repeating it. So all of that, you're magnificent. You are the creme de la creme, and I am inspired to have heard you. So we need to have justice reform. In Michigan, it was a study that I learned last week of so many people who have left jail could not find jobs because of their record. So what they do, they want to wipe the record clean. It is about time. Never mind the fact that they were in many cases in jail, in prison, not for violent crimes, but for
Small crimes.
the penny, the little things. And you are marked for life. And it breaks my heart. The disparity of income. I mean, we can go on and on. Really, the chasm that exists. The COVID. This really exposed it all. The fact that communities of color are the last to to get vaccinated, and people who have the means. And even by the scandal, you talk about California having the scandal with getting their children of Hollywood stars in select colleges. How about paying and using their status to get vaccinated instead of waiting for their own turn? And so I don't know. You guys, maybe I gave enough there. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on the point you made.
New York Times revealed today in one of the interview programs, Sunday, face the nation, meet the press, the reliable sources. This is my morning with the coffee, with Turkish coffee. It was revealed that the New York Times has a problem. What is the problem? They do open the doors to minorities, but not the executive suites, not the higher echelons. So they have to actively work to really make opportunity. In my next life, I'm going to be born American. I love America. I really adore America. And look at you. I wish I could embrace you all. Really, you're young enough to be my daughters. But it is not a betrayal of patriotism to say that we are not perfect. We are far from perfect, and we need to attack it. As I tell my white brethren, black lives matter, of course, and all lives matter, of course, but black lives matter most right now. Why, Professor? I said, look, the Jews had 40 years to travel in the desert. In those 40 years, that generation died in order to go into the promised land strong and energetic. We have our population 400 years, and one reconstruction failed because it was aborted in 1876. Isn't it now wonderful that we have the opportunity to write the score, to really make a difference, to make what the 65 bill civil rights laws propose? But we haven't done it. We haven't done it. And as I also mentioned in a different context, what a wonderful country this would have been had Malcolm X, JFK, Medgar Evers, RFK, and we had elected Humphrey 68, that decade. Had they lived, I met Malcolm X, and we had a tete-a-tete. And he said, young man, when I said, hey, I'm an immigrant, you're going to tell me that I have to look forward to a race war? I have aspirations. I want to make a difference. And he was taken aback because he expected tit for tat, to accuse him of racism, etc. And he looked at me and he said, young man, maybe you're right. Maybe we will prevent the worst of our differences. However, and this has haunted me to this day, and I get emotional. he looked at me and he said, prophetically, but I will not be here. Thank you, Doreen. It's a wow moment. That was in 1963. I was a sophomore in college. In 65, he goes to Mecca. He has an epiphany. He looks to his right in the great mosque. He sees a brown man. He looks to his left. He sees a white man. They're my brothers. And he has, of course, that falling out with Elijah Muhammad. And that was the signing of his death certificate.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much,
I've given you a
Professor.
lot, I think, to
Yes.
think about, and I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Professor. Dorinda, I'd like to ask you a question regarding the Black Voters Matter Fund, which is co-created by Latasha Brown. She did a lot of work on helping people of color clear their warrants and fines, and because obviously that's a barrier for them as regards employment, housing, and also their voting. What do you have to say as regards this?
I think it was can you hear me? I think it was one, it was very timely and very much needed. A large quantity of the African American population, especially male, have issues that are pertaining to law enforcement, either because they've been implicated in things that they were actually involved in, or they happen to be innocent bystanders. But there are a lot of them that unfortunately have issues with child support. And as a result, they end up getting into the legal system and into the courts in ways that I'll have to be quite honest and say, African immigrants who come here, they're smart. They know how to stay out of those pipelines. The guys, they know how to stay out of those pipelines. They know that they exist, but they have arrangements. Unfortunately, it was very timely that was taken care of, because in many of the southern states, that was used as a mechanism of voter suppression to these men and women, some women, from actually voting. And so some of the states would basically say, I think it was Louisiana, Mississippi, even Georgia, Florida, we actually made a donation to an organization in Florida from Washington, D.C. to help people who had been formerly incarcerated so that they could get on the voter rolls, because they were being denied that access. So not only was it timely, and hopefully it will continue, because as someone said earlier, we're preparing now, as you know, every 2 years. I'm a former communications director on Capitol Hill. That's where I met Angel. So I know that every 2 years, the members of Congress have to be reelected. And in 2020, what year are we now? 2024, in 2023, there will be elections again. And even Ralph Warnock has to run for re-election because his 2-year time period will be up. So, a lot of people don't know that. And a lot of organizations such as hers, who basically went in and paid these warrants and these fees and everything, are positioning these people to be able to stay on the voter rolls and not be deleted, because some of these states are using that as a means to delete or deter not just African Americans, but many others from voting. Yes.
Yeah, so what roles do you believe that the faith community has to play in educating voters, especially in the Black and the brown communities?
You know what, honestly, Ugaji, that has changed a lot. It used to be amongst us that our churches were a very sufficient stronghold for us to disseminate information to the community. With the fast pace of life, the internet, people just not going to church anymore, there has been some faltering along the way. And the political connection that used to exist normally in the African American churches has kind of fallen to the wayside. People don't go there to get political messages anymore. However, here in DC, right before the election times, many of our council members will go to churches and stand up and pontificate at the altar, or they'll find some time to be on program to share that they're running for office. But in terms of political messaging, it's really fallen down to more combination of churches, and it's the stronger entity has been community-based organizations that are nonprofits, that are not 501, that are not hindered by their nonprofit status, but they have an arm that they can work with. And the churches, the clergy, I would say, have stepped away from strongly being involved in politics unless they're running for office, because what they're finding is the people who are the parishioners who are showing up in church are not the ones who really should be getting that message. They're not getting it. The younger people aren't going. And even if they were to say, hey, are you voting? Did you go to the polls? There was a whole program called Soul to the Polls, and incorporating the churches and the community-based organizations of the effort. This happened to have been very significant in this last election. I think as we move forward in these next 2 years, and depending on how this pandemic plays out, many of us are doing living room Baptists and bedside Baptists. We're not going to church, we're going online. And so there's even more of a distance and more of a digital divide in terms of dissemination of information. So I'm sensing this is just looking at the lay of the land, especially in a very southern state like Georgia. Georgia has a very strong religious network. However, Georgia's saving grace, and which helped to turn it blue, is the population has been changing. Many people from the north have been going back to the south to live because it's cheaper, it's back at home, and they help to change the dynamics in places where before they felt uncomfortable. They're going back, and they're joining the churches that belong to the communities where their parents had come from. So it's cyclical, and that's what helped to basically catapult the voting numbers in Georgia, because these younger people, these professionals who retired, who went back to Georgia to settle down, they did get involved in their churches. They did get involved in their community-based organizations, and they did work with faith-based leaders, especially Ralph Warnock, who is the pastor for Martin Luther King's former church. And even we had a Zoom call with him here in DC. We have an ethnic council with our DC Democratic Party, and we had a personal Zoom call with Ralph Warnock to listen to his platform, what he foresaw as what was coming in the pipeline. And religion came into play a little bit, but it came into play more beyond Ralph Warnock. It came into play more when we were doing voter suppression Zoom calls. We had with Alice Miller, we basically did some voter suppression phone calls. We had about 500 people, but across the top on our Zoom call were members of all of the religious clergy from all the religious faiths. We had Jewish, we had Muslim, we had all of them. And they spoke to the participants about the importance of voting. So we came together in a way similar to the civil rights movement, but not as strong. But we didn't have the strength from the inside to really push up, but we did what we could do with the faith-based organizations. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. So would you say that promoting economic justice and smart growth strategies through research, education, and advocacy is very important as regards votes?
Yes, without a doubt. Economic justice, first and foremost, because we all are aware of the economic disparities that exist across the board. From a state standpoint, each state has its different issues, but across the board in terms of minimum wage and being able to have access to employment. Smart growth and advocacy, I would say that the groups and organizations that formed or were bolstered, I would say, by the movement that happened with Black Lives Matter, but even before then, with the Women's March that took place. When we organized the Women's March, I know the three ladies who did that. The impetus and the energy, because I had to also, when they came to Washington, I had to always deal with the people with the pink hats. I was like, where are these pink hats? And I realized it was from the Women's March. But the sheer efficacy of these women coming together from around the world and forging relationships and partnerships with women in other places around the world, and all at the same time, we made it known that, hold up, me too, you can't do this, this is not right. We sent a cohesive, united message from an advocacy standpoint that advocated for women's rights and the sanctity of the existence of women. We give life. We are the life givers and life bearers. And all of these women coming together, it was, let's put it this way, men became more aware of economic justice and advocacy and smart growth when their women left them at home for a few days to come to Washington to march, and around the world when they gathered. Men said, wait a second, I better, my antenna better go up. I better listen to this, because if this is important to her, she's going to bring this, she's going to leave for a few days and I have to take care of the family and the kids. But when she comes back, I am going to have to understand what she experienced and what she wants to share with me, because we all know women in general, we are the ones who impact our communities and families on a daily basis. And we plant the seeds. We plant the seeds from which harvest is done around the world for issues that affect our families and our communities. So yes, I think that as we move forward, it's going to be even more important. I'm sorry, I'm from Brooklyn, so I speak fast, but it's more important that we focus on economic justice, smart growth, and advocacy, not just for women or just for African Americans. You and I, had a conversation regarding also where things are going regarding the African community. And one of the things that I've noted, and I'm very involved here with the African community, is that heretofore, from a cultural standpoint, many African immigrants, first generation, even second generation, are very cloistered. They stay amongst themselves and they keep cultural nuances in their home environments. But as I told you on the phone, when they step outside their home, the police officer only sees the Black boy.
Yeah, you're right.
That is true.
Black man. And so this young man who's going out here, leaving this very secure cultural environment that's home, that's founded upon strong African tradition and food and clothing, the whole 9 yards. And then they're going out into the world to assimilate, to be an American. And they're thinking, oh, I'm safe and comfortable. I can do what I want to do. But when the police officer stops them, he only sees a Black boy. Black boy, and he sees a Black boy jaywalking. That happens to, there's 3 boys walking together and they're jaywalking. He's just saying they're jaywalking, not that they come from an African family that came here, that may have come from a place that was they were traumatized when their parents came over. Another issue too is, and you brought it up, Naoma, is you were talking about the trauma that you experienced in your home country. Well, the mental health issue is coming into play also. And that also influences voting patterns and whether people vote or not. Because if you're coming from a country where you've been traumatized or you've been subject to a coup, for example, in a country where a coup took place. I had several Nigerian friends of mine call me when January 6th took place. And they said, Dorinda, we became intensely sick to our stomach and stayed in the bed for 3 or 4 days. And I said, why? They said, because we have experienced a coup in our own country and never visualized that something like that would happen in America. So it took away a safety valve that had been around many of the immigrants who came to the States. And they looked around and said, wait a second, I left this. How could this happen here? So I think they will be voting in 2023 and 24. I think that they've had a wake-up call. Many of us have had a wake-up call in many ways. And I think that not only economic justice, advocacy, and smart growth are going to be pivotal issues that are going to affect it's going to affect everyone across the board.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dorinda, because I've actually been in Nigeria when they've ever had any coup. I was actually there in the coup that sort of preceded the Nigerian Biafran War.
Right.
I'm actually a Biafran refugee.
Okay.
So when I saw what was happening on the 6th, I couldn't believe it. And all the trauma of war, because once you've been in a conflict zone, in a war zone, it suddenly comes back.
Yes.
You don't realize you've been impacted.
Yes.
When I was watching on telly, what was happening in the capital, first of all, I couldn't believe it. And secondly, it took me back to the Nigerian Biafran Civil War.
Of course.
Because I specifically remember that day, I think I must have been about 7 years old, when classical music was being played over the radio. I couldn't go to school that day and nobody was telling me why. Then to suddenly hear we are at war. I mean, so when I suddenly saw what was happening on Capitol Hill, it took me back to Biafra all those years ago.
Of course.
It suddenly made me realize that we live in fragile times. You know, you can't take anything for granted. If it can happen here in the United States, it can happen anywhere. The same thing's happening in Myanmar right now, isn't it? You know?
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me as well about, you know, the dangers of the big man politics, which is our experience in Africa of the big man. And when experiencing the big man in the United States, you're like, oh my God, like this guy reminds me of my own president, like in South Africa. It was Jacob Zuma, reminded me so much of Donald Trump. So the trauma, having left South Africa to come and live here and having to live through the trauma of the presidency of Donald Trump, it was just, you know, it was just triggered all the time. It's like, this guy reminds me so much of that guy over there, and having to live in these two countries and having to be re-traumatized I mean, I was like, this guy's gotta go because I can't live through this again, you know.
You know, there is a kind of schizophrenia that I detect in American psyche. We love immigrants and we despise them for their smells, for their looks, for their beliefs, for whatever. However, if we stop and think, you know, I've concluded it's not so regional, I don't think, that the genius of America is that it regenerates itself every now and then, precisely from the energy, from the brawn, from the creativity of immigrants. So it's really shooting ourselves in the foot to say, now that we are here, let's turn the empire, not the empire, the Statue of Liberty inward, and let's build walls. No. This is, of course, the negative part of the departing country is that there is a brain drain that is putting them, that it condemns them to perpetual poverty or underdevelopment. You know, they will never reach that apogee of first world status. I hear this especially with Greece. Greece, of course, is in the front line of immigrants from the Middle East because of the wars there in Syria, etc. And they hate them. They hate them also because they are Muslim. They hate them because they are darker. And I'm frequently interviewed on Greek radio, and they love to hear me, but they hate me for what I say to them. I say, you know, you try, they speak about the purity, maintaining the purity of blood, of the Greek blood. I said, stop right there. The last person who said, I want a pure nation, cost 50 million people. Stop it. Invite them in. They are willing to do the various jobs just because they finally have safety. They have security of sorts. And most of them, because they see the racism, and I interviewed them, Nigerians and Senegalese, and many of them have learned to speak Greek fluently. And so I engaged them, and I said, "You like it here?" "No." "Where do you want to go?" "North, north." And their land of opportunity is always Germany. It's ironic, but Germany is also one of the focuses of Jewish population. Isn't it ironic? Today, the three areas with a concentration of Jews is Israel, number one, the United States, number two, and Germany, number three. They prosecute anti-Semitism to the nth degree. So people there feel, after so many, after what they went through. I just wanted to throw that theory out.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Professor. I think we'll have to end. I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank Neoma and Dorinda, and for Professor for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
I'd like to say that although today is the ending of Black History Month, I believe every day should be Black History Month, when we remember more particularly the contributions that African Americans have made to America. We shouldn't forget that. And more particularly African American women, I'm very delighted to see women of color rising. And I believe that the 21st century will see the very important role that women of color will play, not just in the United States, I believe globally. I mean, if you were to look, for example, of my homeland, the United Kingdom, you'd be amazed how many we have. And the Priti Patel is of Indian descent. Her parents were immigrants to London during the time of Idi Amin. The Attorney General is from Mauritius. There are lots of women of color in the cabinets and in politics in the United Kingdom. Now, when I was growing up in the 60s in London, there were not many women of color there. And we have to, all I'm going to say is keep a lookout for the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. I see him as being a future Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And he's of Indian descent. He's a rising star. I just see that. So I'd like to thank you so much. And if we could end with a musical interlude again. And I wish you all good health, to be well and be safe. And Dorinda, I'm looking forward to meeting you.
Thank you, everyone. Nice meeting you all.
Thank you, Miss. Nice seeing you. Be well. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dorinda.
Thank you, Dorinda. Nice meeting you.
Thank you, Samuel, joining us from Toronto.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
My sweet mother, I no go forget you. My sweet mother will suffer for me when I dey cry. My mother go cry. She no know wetin to do. You know well. Now wetin dey worry you, my pikin.
Dorinda, this must bring memories, good memories.
chop. She know they tire her, sweet mother. I no go forget the summer where you suffer for me, yeah, yeah. Sweet mother, sweet mother, yeah, yeah. Sweet mother, sweet mother, yeah, yeah. Sweet mother, sweet mother.
Thank you, Dorinda.
Thank you. That was so nice. Thank you.
Let's chat during the week.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Okay,
Okay, God bless you. Thank you.
no problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Samuel.
Thank
We
you.
have somebody zooming in from Togo.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Oh, now?
Thanks a lot.
Good night.
Night, Catherine.
Bye.
Bye, Dorinda.
Bye-bye. I can't sign off here.